The first time I noticed Ethan, it was just a passing glance like any other glance, nothing out of the ordinary. But that was the moment it all started, whether I wanted it to or not. I had always known he was my son, but lately, there was something about him that felt different. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way he stood a little taller now, or the way his eyes seemed to hold a depth I hadn't seen before. Or maybe it was the way his presence filled the room like a sudden storm rolling in. Sophie had always been there, of course. She was the rock of the family, the steady hand that guided us all. But lately, even she had noticed the shift between Ethan and me. The distance, the awkwardness. It was there, hovering between us like an unseen weight. The days blurred together after that moment. The accidental brushes of skin, the way our eyes would meet and linger for just a fraction too long. The quiet, unspoken tension grew every day until it reached a breaking point one evening. Sophie had gone to bed early, as she often did when things weren't quite right between us, and Ethan and I found ourselves alone in the house. The kitchen was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound filling the space between us. I was wiping down the counters, trying to keep my mind occupied, but it was impossible to ignore the electricity in the air. I didn't hear his footsteps at first, but I felt him. The weight of his presence at the doorway was unmistakable. When I turned around, there he was standing there like he had something important to say. Something heavy that he could no longer keep hidden. "I need to talk to you," Ethan said, his voice low but urgent. There was something in his eyes that made my stomach twist. Something I hadn't seen before. Something raw. I forced myself to stay calm, to act like everything was normal, but inside my heart was racing. "What about?" I asked, my voice betraying me, trembling in a way I couldn't hide. "I don't know how to explain this," he began, taking a step closer. His gaze never left mine. There was a pull between us, one that I couldn't ignore even if I tried. But I can't keep pretending like it's not there. This, whatever it is between us, I don't know what it means, but I can't pretend it's nothing anymore. The words hung in the air, thick with tension. I set the dish towel down on the counter, trying to steady my hands, my mind, but everything was slipping away. My heart was pounding in my chest, and all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but I knew. I knew exactly what he meant. How could I lie about it any longer? How could I pretend like nothing had changed? Ethan didn't back away. Instead, he closed the gap between us until there was no space left between us. His face was inches from mine, and I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and steady. In that moment, everything else faded into the background, and there was only him, only us. His eyes searched mine as if waiting for me to say something, to stop him. But I didn't. I couldn't. "I mean this," he whispered, his voice so soft it felt like a secret between us. His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, and the simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through my body. My breath caught, and I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Everything around me disappeared, and all I could focus on was him. And then he kissed me. It was everything I had been avoiding, everything I had been trying to bury. It was unexpected, out of nowhere, and yet it felt like the most natural thing in the world. His lips were gentle at first, testing, as if he were unsure of what I would do, but I didn't pull away. I kissed him back, because in that moment it was all I could do. The kiss deepened, slow and searching, and I felt like I was drowning in it. There was no turning back now. Whatever had been between us, whatever feelings I had tried to ignore, were no longer buried. They were here, raw and exposed, and there was no way to take them back. When we finally broke apart, it was like the world came crashing back. Ethan's eyes were wide, searching mine, as if looking for something, for confirmation, for permission. But I couldn't give him either. I couldn't speak. My chest was tight, and I could barely breathe. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice shaking with regret. But I saw something else in his eyes too. Something that made my stomach churn with both guilt and something else I couldn't name. Longing, fear, maybe both. I didn't mean to make things weird, he said, taking a step back, but his eyes never left mine. I just couldn't stop. His voice faltered, and it felt like he was waiting for me to tell him to stop, to tell him that it was wrong, that we had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. But I didn't. I couldn't. The silence between us was suffocating. It felt like everything was unraveling in that moment, and I didn't know how to hold it together. I'm sorry, Ethan said again, his voice barely a whisper, but I didn't want him to apologize. I didn't want him to feel sorry for something that felt so inevitable. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to tell him that I didn't regret it. Not really. That I couldn't walk away from this, not now, not after everything that had happened. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, frozen, my heart racing in my chest. He slowly turned and walked toward the door, his back to me. He didn't look back, but I didn't stop him. I couldn't. I'll go to my room, he said quietly, his voice strained, before he disappeared down the hallway. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind spinning. The house felt quieter than it ever had before, but it wasn't just the silence that got to me. It was everything, the weight of the kiss, the weight of the truth we could no longer hide. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know what to do with it. I felt like I was suffocating in my own confusion. I spent the rest of the night pacing through the house, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I couldn't face Sophie out yet, not when I knew what I had done, what Ethan and I had done. And I couldn't bring myself to look him in the eye again, not with the way things had changed between us. When I finally did see Ethan again, it was hours later. The house was dark except for the soft light coming from his bedroom. I knocked on his door, my heart pounding in my chest. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and I didn't know if I was ready for what was coming next. He opened the door, and when I saw him standing there, wearing a simple t-shirt and pajama pants, it was like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I need to talk, he said quietly, his voice tinged with uncertainty. He wasn't the same person anymore. Neither was I. I stood there for a long moment, my hand still hovering over the doorknob. Ethan's voice had brought me back to reality, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was happening between us, something that neither of us could undo. Come in, he said, his voice softer now, but it still held that unspoken urgency, like he was waiting for me to make the next move. My heart was pounding as I crossed the threshold, stepping into his room. The space was familiar, but in this moment it felt foreign. Everything felt foreign. I didn't know how to start. I didn't know what to say. What could I say after everything that had happened? Ethan was standing by his bed, looking at me like he was waiting for me to say something. But I was still stuck in that moment, replaying the kiss over and over in my mind. The heat, the rawness of it, the way it felt like the world had shifted in a single breath. I couldn't erase it from my memory, no matter how hard I tried. Finally, I spoke, my voice trembling just a little. Ethan, what are we doing? His expression hardened for a brief second, as if he had been expecting that question, but he didn't pull away. He didn't retreat. Instead, he looked at me with something that I couldn't quite place, something that was both familiar and terrifying at the same time. I don't know, he said quietly, his words almost lost in the stillness of the room. But I don't think I can pretend it didn't happen. I can't either, I whispered, though the words tasted bitter on my tongue. But that doesn't change anything. We can't just ignore what we've done. His eyes met mine, intense and searching, and for a moment I felt like we were both caught in the same storm, torn between what was right and what we both felt. There was no easy answer. There couldn't be. I know it's wrong, Ethan said, stepping closer, but I've never felt anything like this before. I can't go back to pretending. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to admit it, but I understood exactly what he was saying. I'd felt it too. The attraction, the pull, the way everything felt out of control. The way I couldn't think straight when he was around. But we were family. This was never supposed to happen. I don't know what we're supposed to do, I said, my voice cracking as I finally admitted what I had been avoiding for so long. This isn't just some passing feeling. This is bigger than that. And I don't know if we can fix it. For a moment, Ethan just stared at me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. It was as if he was torn between pushing forward and pulling back, but there was no going back. The moment had passed. Whatever we had, it was real now, and nothing could undo it. I don't want to go back, he said softly. I don't want to pretend anymore, not with you. I felt a lump form in my throat, a mixture of fear and longing and something else that I couldn't name. I wanted to pull him into my arms, to tell him that I understood, that I didn't want to feel this way either. But I couldn't. I couldn't act like it was all okay. It wasn't. And I couldn't deny the complexity of the situation any longer. We can't stay like this, I said, my voice firm, but the words felt hollow. We have to figure out what this means. And we have to be careful. Ethan looked away, his expression hardening. Careful? He echoed, almost with a hint of disbelief. Are we just supposed to forget it happened and go on like nothing's changed? Like everything's the same? I opened my mouth to respond, but I didn't have the words. He was right, nothing was the same, it couldn't be. Ethan, I began, my voice softening. This isn't just something we can ignore, it's bigger than us. I know, he said quietly, but I don't know how to fix it either. I don't know how to go back to pretending. The room was suffocating with unspoken words, with feelings we both knew couldn't stay hidden any longer. There was no easy solution, no perfect way forward, and there was no turning back. I don't want to hurt you, I whispered, my heart heavy with the weight of the truth. I don't want to hurt you either, Ethan replied, his voice so raw that it almost shattered me. But it's already happening. Neither of us knows how to stop it. I could feel the tension between us, a crackling energy that made the air thick with anticipation. We were on the edge, standing at the precipice of something we couldn't fully understand. The weight of our emotions hung between us, and I knew that whatever came next, it would change us forever. But I don't want to lose you. You won't, Ethan said, taking a step closer again, his hand outstretched as if to reassure me. But I wasn't sure I believed him. I'll always be here, I promise. And in that moment, I wanted to believe him. I wanted to hold on to that promise, to the comfort of knowing that we weren't alone in this. But I couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. The complications, the consequences, the things that couldn't be undone. The silence stretched between us, a heavy, suffocating thing. I didn't know what to say, how to make this better, how to fix what had already been broken. I think we need space, I finally said, my voice shaking as I made the decision that I knew had to be made. We need time to think, to figure out what this means. Ethan's face fell, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of hurt in his eyes, but he didn't argue, he didn't fight me. I understand, he said softly, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the situation was finally crashing down on him. I just don't want to lose you. You won't, I repeated, though I wasn't sure if it was a promise or just something I had to say to make this moment feel less impossible. But we need to be careful. We need to figure this out, one step at a time. With those words hanging in the air, I turned and walked out of his room, leaving him behind. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It was heavier now, filled with everything we had said, everything we had left unsaid. And I wasn't sure how to fix it, but I knew that somehow we had to,